The morning count at Ironwood Federal Penitentiary was supposed to be routine. Every dawn, officers walked the same steel corridors, checked the same reinforced doors, and counted the same faces staring back from behind bars. But on a cold morning in October, something impossible had happened. 3 inmates had vanished from one of the most secure prisons ever built. No alarms had sounded, no fences had been breached, and according to the security logs, every door had remained locked. Welcome to the verdict room, where we uncover the hidden stories behind the world's most dangerous prisons. Ironwood Federal Penitentiary had been designed with a single mission: control. Built decades earlier in a remote desert region, the prison was engineered to hold inmates who had proven too dangerous or too disruptive for ordinary correctional facilities. Violent gang leaders, repeat escape artists, and prisoners serving life sentences without parole all ended up behind Ironwood's walls. The architecture reflected that mission. Towering concrete barriers surrounded the compound. Multiple layers of razor wire covered the outer fences. Motion detectors scanned the perimeter 24 hours a day, while armed guards patrolled elevated watchtowers overlooking every yard and corridor. Inside, the system was even more rigid. Every door was controlled electronically from a central control room known simply as Central. Cameras monitored every hallway. Steel bars reinforced every ventilation shaft. And each cell door was equipped with a locking mechanism designed to prevent even the smallest mechanical tampering. Escaping Ironwood wasn't just difficult, it was supposed to be impossible. Yet somehow, 3 inmates had disappeared. To understand how it happened, investigators first looked at the men who vanished. The first was Daniel Cruz. Cruz had been serving a 25-year sentence for armed robbery and organized crime. Inside prison, he had quickly gained a reputation for being intelligent, disciplined, and unusually patient. Unlike many inmates who spent their time trying to dominate others through violence, Cruz built influence quietly. He listened, he watched, and most importantly, he learned. The second inmate was Leonard "Lenny" Price. Price was very different from Cruz. Loud, charismatic, and physically imposing, he had been convicted for multiple violent offenses tied to gang activity. Inside Ironwood, Price acted as an enforcer, someone who made sure prison politics stayed in balance. Where Cruz used strategy, Price used intimidation. But the third inmate was the most unusual of all. Michael Adler had once worked as an electrician before landing in prison on fraud charges tied to financial crimes. Unlike the other 2 men, Adler had never been involved in gangs or violence before incarceration. But inside Ironwood, technical knowledge was just as powerful as physical strength. And Adler understood systems. Inside cell block C, these 3 men formed an unlikely alliance. At first, other inmates assumed the relationship was temporary. In prison, alliances shift constantly depending on power struggles, gang conflicts, and survival strategies. But Cruz, Price, and Adler stayed close. They ate together in the mess hall, exercised together during yard time, and whenever they were seen speaking quietly near the back of the recreation area, they often stopped talking when guards passed nearby. To correctional officers, it looked like ordinary prison behavior. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Ironwood had strict routines. Lights out at 10 p.m., head counts every few hours. Guard patrols that passed through each cell block on a predictable schedule. To prison administrators, those routines created order. But to someone carefully studying the system, routines also created patterns, and patterns could be exploited. Over the next several months, small things began happening around cell block C. Nothing dramatic, just minor irregularities. One night, a hallway camera briefly lost signal for several seconds. Another time, a maintenance door was discovered unlocked during a morning inspection. A third incident involved a ventilation grate that appeared slightly loose before being secured again. Each event was logged and repaired, but none of them were treated as major security threats. Investigators would later realize those moments weren't accidents. They were tests. Inside prison walls, time moves differently. Weeks blur into months, months blur into years. And patience becomes a weapon. According to the later investigation, Cruz had spent nearly a year studying Ironwood's operations. He watched how guards responded to alarms, observed how quickly maintenance crews arrived after system malfunctions. He even memorized the exact timing of overnight patrols that moved through cell block C. Adler, meanwhile, was quietly learning something else. Electrical schematics. While working in the prison library, Adler requested technical manuals related to building maintenance and electrical systems. On paper, the request seemed harmless. Many inmates used the library to educate themselves. But Adler wasn't just reading, he was studying. By the time autumn arrived, the three men had something far more dangerous than tools. They had information. The night everything happened began quietly. At 11:30 p.m., officers conducted the routine night count. 92 inmates present in cell block C. The numbers were verified. The logbook was signed, and the prison settled into its usual overnight silence. At 12:40 a.m., a brief flicker appeared on one of the corridor cameras. Just a moment of static. Security operators in Central barely noticed. But during that flicker, something critical had occurred. Adler's cell door unlocked, not through the control system. Not through a guard's command, the electronic lock simply released. Investigators later suspected that a small electrical disruption had been triggered somewhere inside the prison's wiring system, just enough to temporarily confuse the locking mechanism. Adler stepped quietly into the corridor. Moments later, Cruz's door opened, then Price's, 3 doors, unlocking within seconds of each other. None of it appeared in the official system logs. The men moved quickly but calmly through the darkened corridor. They didn't run. Running attracts attention. Instead, they walked with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. Their destination wasn't the outer fence. It was somewhere deeper inside the prison. At the far end of cell block C was a rarely used maintenance corridor that ran behind the walls. Most inmates never even realized it existed. But Adler had discovered it months earlier while studying the building diagrams. Behind a locked panel in that corridor was a narrow service passage used by electricians and plumbing crews. Normally, it remained sealed, but earlier that week, a maintenance inspection had quietly left the panel unsecured. Whether that had been planned, or simply lucky, remains unknown. The 3 inmates slipped inside. From there, the passage twisted through the building like a hidden maze, running behind walls, under floors, and alongside ventilation ducts that connected different parts of the facility. Navigating those tunnels in darkness would have been impossible without preparation. But Adler had mapped them carefully. Meanwhile, Cruz kept track of time. The next guard patrol would pass cell block C in exactly 9 minutes. They had to disappear before that. The passage eventually led to a utility chamber located beneath the prison laundry facility. From there, a drainage tunnel carried wastewater away from the prison compound. It was never designed as an escape route, but it led outside the inner security perimeter. By the time the guard patrol reached cell block C, the cells looked normal. 3 inmates lay motionless beneath blankets, appearing asleep. But those figures weren't prisoners. They were crude decoys made from folded clothing and pillows. The deception lasted until the 4 a.m. head count. That's when officers realized something was terribly wrong. Cruz, Price, Adler, all missing. The prison immediately went into full lockdown. Search teams combed every corridor, every yard, every storage room. Helicopters circled the surrounding desert. Roadblocks appeared on highways miles away, but the 3 men were already gone. The investigation that followed uncovered a disturbing truth. Ironwood's security systems hadn't failed in one single moment. They had failed slowly, piece by piece. Camera outages dismissed as technical glitches, maintenance panels left unsecured, electrical systems vulnerable to subtle manipulation, and routines so predictable that inmates could map them like clockwork. Yet the most shocking revelation came weeks later. Investigators reviewing prison library records discovered Adler had spent months studying the facility's electrical architecture. Cruz had studied guard patrol schedules, and Price had quietly enforced their secrecy inside the inmate population. It hadn't been a desperate escape, it had been a carefully engineered operation. To this day, the fate of the 3 men remains uncertain. Some reports claimed they fled across the border. Others suggested they separated and disappeared into different cities under no identities, but no confirmed capture was ever recorded. Inside Ironwood Penitentiary, the escape forced sweeping changes. Security systems were upgraded, guard patrols were randomized. Maintenance corridors were sealed permanently, yet the mystery still lingers. Because despite all the technology, all the surveillance, and all the walls designed to keep prisoners inside, 3 men studied the system long enough to make it fail. And sometimes, the most dangerous weapon inside a prison is not violence, it's patience.